Today's film brings the dysfunction right back to where it belongs, in a holiday picture. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. Folks, I'm really glad to have with us today screenwriter Lindsay Joy and actor, co-writer, and producer Gene Pope to discuss their latest film, King of Knives. You know, it is not exactly a holiday film, but it is a holiday film. So it's kind of both. You know, it's not your typical Hallmark holiday film. And that's, I think, what is a good thing about it. And yes, it takes the dysfunction that could happen in families, meets it head on in a comedic fashion, but also has some very dark tones as well. It's kind of unavoidable here. So you get everything in there, kids. And look, it was really great to have Lindsay and to have Gene back. We had him a few years back for his movie Bruce. So Gene's back with us. He's been in the podcast before. And they're here to talk about what it took to get their film in the can and all the thought that went into making it, and especially collaborating, because this is an independent film, and they really, as you'll hear us talk about, they workshopped it. They collaborated together, and Gene, as an actor, really knew what kind of film he wanted to make as an actor, and he was able to kind of draft that in his character by collaborating so closely with Lindsay, and that's why Gene has story by credit. But look, if you support independent films, and it's important that you do during these strange times we're in, but even when we're not in strange times, kids, come on, support independent cinema. I hope you will go look up King of Knives. You could find it anywhere where you could rent a movie. So you can find it on Fandango or rent it on Amazon or iTunes, all the usual places. And, give it a shot. See what you think of it. And if you like it, of course, leave a review at the respective place that you rented it from, because that actually helps the algorithm for independent films as well. So I hope you'll do that. But look, Lindsay and Gene were very generous with their time, and they were great about talking about all the details of what it took to get this film made independently. So I hope you check that out, and I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, I hope you'll also check out Backstory Magazine. We are publishing issue 42. It is on its way. By the time you hear this podcast, it might already be live. We have so many cool things in there, and there's a few last end of the year interviews that are going to slide into the new year that we just got, like, as things are winding down. So there are a lot of reasons to read Backstory. I think I'm going to release an entire podcast about it. Just a really short one, but to tell you what's inside. But we have so many good stories, and everybody worked so hard and made it come together. So if you've ever considered supporting us, if you've never read us, go to backstory.net. You can read us on a desktop or laptop or via the iPad app, and you could check us out. You could test drive us for free, because we have a free issue there, and it's a full issue. There's a lot in it. So you'll be able to get a sense of who we are and what we do. And if you like us, I hope you'll consider subscribing. Subscribing gives you instant access to any new issue when we publish it. It also gives you access to our archives. So you could read right now about 3 years back into the magazine, and we're continuing to add more older issues. It currently goes back to issue 30, and we're just getting ready to add issue 29. So we're going to continue going back in time in our archive as long as we have the time to get our new content up, which is the most important thing. And of course, you could also give the gift of Backstory for the storyteller in your life. So you could gift our magazine to a friend. You could do that as well, or gift yourself. And you know what? You could use discount code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a year's subscription. You could use that at backstory.net in your checkout cart. So look, it really means a lot to me to have my podcast listeners support my passion project. So thanks for considering. And of course, while you're surfing around online, go support Lindsay and Gene's film, King of Knives, and go rent it. Go leave a good review as well. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into our conversation with Lindsay Joy and Gene Pope about their latest film, King of Knives. Okay, Lindsay, Gene, welcome. How's it going over there?
Doing good, thanks. Doing good. A little bit of snow.
oh, really? A little bit of snow?
Yeah. We've got we had a foot of snow like 2 days ago, and it's still here.
I bet you have 2 feet of snow upstate, so there's that.
Okay, so you're in upstate. Gotcha. I'm happy to report there's no snow here in Los Angeles, and I hope it stays that way. That's why I live here, damn it. All right. Well, so we're gonna get into this, but before we get there, it's always good to give our listeners and our viewers just a baseline on your past. Lindsay, starting with you, what is your past? Did you study writing anywhere, or how did you go about your path towards becoming a screenwriter?
Sure. So I come from a theater background. So I grew up in the middle of nowhere in New Hampshire. I went to school at the University of New Hampshire, studied theater, was an acting major, and I had a professor that said, to round you out as an artist, it would be smart to take a writing class. I wrote a 10-minute play. It ended up winning this like crazy award at the Kennedy Center, and I took it as a major sign that maybe I should pivot slightly into writing. But that was an experience that really it sort of changed everything. You get to meet these unbelievable writers. There, I got to meet Ken Lonergan, not knowing who he was.
Okay.
But when we sort of had our sessions with him, I had seen You Can Count on Me, and it was one of my favorite movies at the time. And just getting access to somebody like that, who is giving us encouragement, but also like real talk, absolute real talk. It was a big moment. So moved to New York City, ended up taking a lot of classes with the Labyrinth Theater. So Philip Seymour Hoffman's theater company. Again, super inspiring. All of those plays are the kinds of plays that I like to write, sort of surprising, messed up families, crazy dynamics, people that are way too honest. Those are the characters I like to populate my work with. And then really, in terms of screenwriting, Gene and I started talking. I'll let him tell you a little bit more about that, but we started talking about like, what would it feel like to write a screenplay instead of a play? And this was my first foray into it. And it was a really wonderful way to sort of introduce myself to screenwriting and film.
Just before we get to Gene for a second, did you have any of your plays produced that you were writing?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I've been really lucky, actually. So, that sort of like off Broadway scene in the city, it's such a great playground to, honestly, to fail and to figure some things out about yourself as a writer and about your voice. And I'm super lucky. A lot of companies have produced me. So all over the place in the city. I've had work up in Louisiana. I've had work up in LA, in Boston, DC, sort of all over the place. So it's been a really lovely way for me to figure out my voice as a writer.
That's awesome. So Gene, we did an episode a few years back for Bruce, your film Bruce, and I'm curious, just to reintroduce you to our listeners and everybody. Tell us a little about yourself and how you kind of gravitated towards this direction of writing and acting.
Well, it goes back quite a ways because I started out as a recording engineer, which made me have a tremendous sensitivity for music and the writing of music, and worked on the Shy Lights and then Tyrone Davis, and this was in Chicago. And then from there, I went into producing at an ad agency, Doyle Dane Bernbach, which was one of the big creative agencies at the time. And I became a producer there. And then when I left there, I spent 10 years to become a director. And then I became a bi-coastal director of commercials. And of course, thought that I was going to use that as a stepping stone to get into narrative, and wrote some treatments. I did the whole 9 yards. And basically what I'm making the long story short here is that I've been on almost every side of the fence. And it was with that then I decided that I wanted to, I had, my children were growing up and I had time to break away from my main business, and I decided that somebody. I went to a play tryout, and a friend that I knew there, and I was dropping my daughter Roxy off, as a matter of fact, for a tryout, and they said to me, "Hey, you acted in high school. Why aren't you trying out for this stuff?" And it's like, I don't know. I probably, and I thought about it. I talked to the kids and they said, yeah, go for it. So I did. Long story short, I decided very quickly that it's like, if I was going to do anything with acting, that I had to have a base of operation. I've always said in life that if you want to become excellent at something, don't reinvent the wheel. First, learn what everybody else knows first, and then you can go from there. And it was then that I decided, it was like going back to college. I went to a 2-year conservatory at the Maggie Flanagan Studios in New York. And my daughter, Roxy, was simultaneously at another studio at the same time for 2 years. And for 2 years, it was like 5 days a week. It was intense. But at least I had a body of knowledge to then go from there. Worked with Lindsay several times. And
wait, you're getting ahead of yourself. I want to ask you a question or two about that.
Yeah.
It's interesting when you hear about somebody doing a big career change, right? And that's a theme that happens in your film as well. What was it like for you to really take a leap like that? And also, if you don't mind me asking, how old were you when you were doing that? Because it's a rare thing. I'm surprised it doesn't happen more often for people to make these, second act decisions in their lives. But you don't hear of people changing jobs, past their 30s as often as you would think.
You're right. And this is something that I will freely admit, is that when I was younger, I was probably, I guess for lack of a better word, obnoxiously intense and smart and driven and everything. And what would happen literally was that if I was in a particular position in a particular field for too long, I'd get bored. Literally, after 2 years, it was like clockwork, is that I'd start to get itchy. It's like, I got to do something else. I understand all this now. I got to do something else. And so I kept throwing the ball higher and higher, and each challenge became, I guess, harder and harder. And I spent more and more years in it. And so for me, it was it started to slow down later on, where I said, okay, I've done this. I have some money. I can do what I want to do. Now, what am I going to do? And that is a time when you start to worry about life, and you start thinking about, all right, am I having a midlife crisis now? Is this what it's like? What's going on here? Things change in your life. And that's sort of how it went with me. And until then, everything started to coalesce in the acting. I've never felt so immersed in studying something before. And it's one of the most difficult things I've ever had to learn, honestly. And so at the same time, having written some stuff myself, it was, I knew what I wanted to do, and I had a very good idea of what I was planning here. And it was then at that point, as I said, okay, let me, I want to approach Lindsay and see if she'd be interested in doing this, because I really loved her dialogue, her sense of dialogue. There's lots of dialogue that I see and hear on lots of things. And I'm not always, and hers was always different. It was unique. It had a twist to it. It had a something. It wasn't just something plucked necessarily from what you see in the papers, what you see on TV or anything like that. It was different, fresh, new. And I wanted to join in with that to create this story, and that's how it all began.
Okay, you're jumping ahead just a hair, though. How did you first discover Lindsay's work? How'd you guys meet?
Boy, when's the first time we met? At Hand Over Hand, right? Was that the first time? Yes.
Yeah. So Gene was an actor for my husband, who is a film and theater director, and it was sort of a night of 3 vignettes. Of a different writer, a gentleman named Patrick Lillis. So Gene was in one of the vignettes. I was actually acting in another vignette, which I rarely do. So we got to know each other pretty well just over the course of that. You're in the trenches trying to put together something off Broadway, and you get to really like everybody. Or when you're lucky, you get to like everybody. And I had some projects coming up. So Gene saw my work there, and that was sort of like the jump off.
Well, Lindsay, you know, he said that he was attracted to your dialogue. What could you tell us about the way that you craft dialogue? Some writers talk it out loud and record it and then listen back to it. Obviously, you have the past of studying theater, so you know, knowing that you've at least acted at some point in your life tells us that you have that sense of inner dialogue. What are some of the tips and tricks that you've noticed on writing dialogue?
I mean, there certainly is an inner back and forth when I'm writing things, and a little bit of a musicality, if I'm being honest. Meaning, I think if you're really listening to how people talk, you can hear different cadences, you can hear different rhythms, and I really love that. Especially, you know, for me, I think I always like to use laughter and humor as a portal to something a little bit deeper and darker. So if I can get the rhythms right of a joke, if I can get things sort of landing the right way, it gives me permission to talk about maybe some things that are uncomfortable to talk about. You know, I really admire writers that have everything laid out in front of them. I have so many writer friends that they have index cards on them at all times for, you know, plot, you know, different characters, all of that. I like to start with characters, and I like to start with situation. And then essentially I'm writing to find out what happens. I don't go in necessarily with a very set, concrete idea. And I like to hear that dialogue. I like to hear their voices a bit. This makes me sound like a complete crazy person.
No, not at all. This is exactly what talking about writing is like. We're all crazy if we're writing.
So, in my own schizophrenic...
Tell us more about your voices.
So, yes. You know, I think with this one, it was really lovely to get into the mindset of Jean's character, Frank, sort of to get into this, like, you know, a gentleman sort of at the end stage of his career with a family falling apart, but still a little bit entitled and still a little bit of an a-hole, but like with a lovable side. So, you know, that was really fun for me because it's so, it feels so distant. And of course there are elements, like it's like a pinch of my dad and then, you know, a mentor of mine and a little bit of Gene himself, if you don't mind my saying, Gene. The daughters came a little bit easier, I'll say that. Although when my sister saw the film, she wrote me and she said, so we're kind of both sisters. Like I'm a little bit of this one and a little bit of that one. And I'm like, yeah, that's accurate. You know, but again, if you sort of get down to basic wants and needs for characters, what do I want? Who do I want it from? What are the given circumstances? It starts to sort of play out in your head. You sort of can't help it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is our non-spoiler section, so I'll make an announcement for our listeners and viewers when we get into the spoilers. So we're still cool, but I just wanted to remind you kids of that before we get too far. But we're going to keep talking about it. You know, Gene, for a second before we move on, what was the biggest lesson that you could say now a few years later that you learned from your experience on Bruce, your last film? Because now you have that distance. And I'm just curious if there was something that occurred during the filming of Bruce that maybe helped you out going to this project, either as an actor or a producer.
Well, I think that one of the things that was a lot of fun in Bruce was that there was a certain amount of ad hoc dialogue in there, that there was definitely a script there and a structure and everything else. But there was a lot of room for, you know, some ad-libbing. And so I felt coming out of that experience that was something that I don't have to be too dear about, is to make sure to have every word be the same, because from my vantage point, if your casting is right, then they're adding a layer. You know, again, this is not like, this is a one-shot deal. This is not like episodic television where it has to be, consistency is very important, of course. But in this case, it's like there's some freedom there And, Lindsay and I had talked about this, in fact. And so there was a certain amount of places in the script where if something extra came up, it's like, yeah, as long as the actors understood and were in their characters, what tended to come out, a slight change maybe, or an extra word here or there, it was like, it was totally in character. And it worked because they were immersed in what Lindsay's dialogue that she had written.
You're in an interesting position in which, you've been able to cultivate films based on not only being an actor, but a producer, in which you're able to put these projects together. So what's your development process like in looking for your new film that you're going to produce?
Well, it starts with the writer, as you can imagine. And, our writer's room, as it were, our mini writer's room was any number of restaurants in the city that we would go in and have dinner, and the next thing you know, the waiters are sitting there going, we're closing. And we would do this night after night. And we had an initial script, let's say, at the end of the first year. And then, again, looking at it, I felt that the issue that we had from the story standpoint was that Frank was completely unlikable. There was he was getting it, but I wasn't trying to end up with just the drama part of it, because one of the things that I felt was that we could do, we had an opportunity to do here, especially with Lindsay's approach to dialogue, was because this is what happens in life, is that you cry in life and you also laugh. You laugh at the absurdity of it. Your kids make you laugh unintentionally. They can be the biggest wise asses in the world, and and it's kind of entertaining because you're trying to teach them one way, but on the inside you're laughing and you're looking at this going, yeah, okay, yeah, that's partly me, isn't it? Okay, et cetera, et cetera. And so that was what I got out of Brewsto, and each time you do something like this, of course, you learn, and you say, okay, well, if I made a mistake here or a mistake there, then this is something to think about the next time. And it's an iterative process. And one of the things about filmmaking is that it's an infinitely iterative process. You can be in your 80s and you're still discovering things. And
yeah,
per our previous discussion, for me, this is like the perfect venue because I'll never stop learning, and it's great.
I want to talk about your creative habit for a second before we get into the deep story points. Just for both of you, Lindsay, when you sit down to write, how important is outlining to your process? And Gene, of course, I know that you've been a contributor as a writer as well. You have a story by credit on this film, and I know you're involved in the process too. So I'm curious to hear your perspective. But Lindsay.
So, all of this, the sort of seed of all of this, and I'm still fascinated by this idea, is the sort of idea of waking up and realizing that you're closer to death than you are to the rest of your life. That the sort of like the clock is on, and what do you have to show for it? This it's more than a midlife crisis. It's sort of this like more existential thing, and when we first started talking, what became clear between the two of us was that we cared about the family dynamic. And we cared about looking at how this family, falls apart and comes back together or not. So those were sort of like those were the cornerstones. And then Gina and I just started talking. I mean, I think this is what happens in most writers' rooms, sort of sharing personal stories that feel relevant, and like, what nugget can we take from that? And then how can we distill that down and switch it a little bit? Or, how can I bastardize it so that it's more theatrical and more interesting for the audience? So I sort of had this idea of where we wanted to go. And then as the writing sort of progressed, I would share pages with Gene We would talk about things. We would bring in actors. All of my really lovely actor friends from the city would sort of all get together in a crappy rehearsal studio in Midtown and read it aloud and sort of hash things out a little bit. And it was always a springboard. You know, you hear something aloud, and of course it's different than your schizophrenic head. It's different when you have actors and live people in front of you. And it would be a springboard to something different, to, oh, maybe we want to add this, or maybe we want to explore that. It made that process so much more rich, I think, because it's very easy as a writer to sort of, you glue yourself to your chair, your desk. It's solitary. You're kind of like banging your head against the wall, or you just have this moment of like glorious progress where you just start writing and writing and writing and writing. Those days are the best. Mwah, chef's kiss. Good for a podcast. But bringing in actors and hearing it aloud, making it more collaborative, made the whole thing just feel more alive for me, and really helped the process, I think.
Do you mentioned note cards earlier. Do you ever note card yourself?
I have I'm like looking around for my journal. I have these journals, and it's not so much sort of plot points as it is characters or potential characters. And I will write down every single thing about their background, almost like an actor would if they were sort of filling in the blanks about a person's background. Like, I really love to think about people and to build characters that way. So it becomes less about that structure and much more about characters and figuring out their dynamics than anything else. You know, I mean, I love Aristotle just as much as the next writer, but sometimes you have to deviate from that, I think, to get something interesting.
So, Jean, so you don't have a screenwriting credit on your own. This is your story by credit. But I'm curious if you have considered writing a script on your own, maybe something that hasn't been unproduced, or do you just like collaborating with a writer as an actor and seeing it grow in front of you, like what Lindsay was just saying?
I'm going to tell you, I've gone through that process of where I've done writing. This was years ago, and spent pretty good amount of time on it. And listening to, as Lindsay was describing, she really put it all together there. And the best way to say, so what is the role that I really enjoy? I'm insanely visual. It comes from being an only child. I mean, literally, I had so much time on my hands as a kid, and I literally had this. I have this imagination that basically, when I read a script or a book, it's the whole movie is flashing before my eyes, literally, and the iterative process that Lindsay and I went through, it was something that I enjoyed immensely, because every time she would give me a new draft, I would take it, I would go in the basement. There's no noise, there's no distraction, there's no nothing. And it had to be absolutely quiet. And I would then start at the first page, go through to the end. And it was all and I learned years ago that my first impression is the most important. If I go back and see if I can change my mind, no good. Absolutely tends to wash it out. It has to be my first impression to keep the overall arc and the overall story, that I can say with authority to any writer and say, yes, this is great. This, I think we need blank, 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 blank. We need to get from here. We need another scene here because this is jumping, or this is whatever it is. There's always a thing. We worked for, it wasn't until, how short was it before we started shooting that we finally got the ending of the movie? That was, that was a part that I actually wrote a lot of that.
And we'll talk about that in the spoiler section more in detail.
Yeah.
But not to get to anything, but the sort of coda, the kind of button to it, was certainly sprung from Jean's head. I had sort of landed in a different place, and we went back and forth on it. I can also say this, Jean, at least from my point of view, what was really lovely, I think, because of that, imagination that you have, that sort of visual kind of mentality that you have, it allowed me to be more spare in my words, because of course if you're used to writing for theater, it's not that you have to spell things out for folks, but what you can capture in a glance between two characters with film, or with a really simple image without banging somebody over the head with a monologue. I mean, there's freedom there. And I feel like Gene really kind of helped me unlock that a little.
You know, I have a degree in theater and film, and this is something that's always fascinated me. It just never makes sense. Everybody has a different process for it. But in a lot of films, there's no time for rehearsal, right? And they just, since they're going in short bursts for scenes, it doesn't worry anybody because they know they could get it right on the day generally. Sometimes they have a little bit of rehearsal beforehand. What you guys have both been talking about a lot is extensive workshopping in such that you're developing the script together with at least yourselves, and Gene, you're the protagonist, but you also have other actors involved at a certain point. So it allows everybody to kind of grow into their roles and evolve, which is a luxury that not all films have, obviously. But it does beg me to ask this question, Gene, especially of you. What do you think about the concept of rehearsing before your film, having just been theatrically trained, as you said, for 2 years? Do you think that's important, or do you think it's just moments that you could workshop and then you'd rather find on set rather than be locked into rehearsal formally with the director?
I love that you asked that, because one of the things that I think I like to do is break the mold a little bit. And I know I'm not the only person who's directed or what have you that actually likes some rehearsal. I think that, especially when you have an ensemble like this cast is, that are putting, and John Delgado, the director, totally agreed with this, to his credit. And it was like, okay, we're going to have a week of rehearsal. And we had a week of rehearsal, and it was in depth. And Patrick Lillis was there as well. And there was, you could see the formation of the characters and the relationships there. And there were times, what that allowed me to do, okay, was that then if I saw anything with now the actual people are going to be creating these characters, as their characters are coming alive, then I had the luxury to go back to Lindsay and say, you know what, this is one thing that's a little rough because of, I'm not getting into specifics, but we were very specific. It's like, this is working. This is, something's not right here. We need to, we need a little more humor, or we need something more specific for this, because it looks like she wants to get slapped in the face, or whatever it is. You see, this is what I'm observing. So in the rehearsal, not only was I rehearsing Frank, but I was also seeing how everybody was reacting off Frank and bouncing off each other, so that we could use that opportunity. And then by the time we got on set, everybody was very locked into their characters already. And so we didn't have to spend extra time when you've got a lot of crew and a lot of money per hour pouring out of the bank, to waste that with saying, so how are we going to do this? You know, we knew how we were going to do it. We knew how we were going to react. Well, they're setting up the camera. Mel Harris and I would be sitting there, and we'd be sort of walking through it and going, okay, so let's take it from here to here, A to B, B to C, C to D, and we're for ourselves. And then when John comes and say, John, we want to do this, and this will work really well, we think. And again, more opportunity for a collaborative process as opposed to an auteur process.
Yeah. Lindsay, when you sit down to write, do you give yourself a page count to hit each day, or do you try and go for a certain amount of hours in your writing habit?
Page counts are so dangerous for me, because I really will have days where, 25, 30 pages will
really?
spurt out. Yeah. Quickly. I mean, like, stupid quick. And then there are days where, if I'm lucky, I get 2 pages out that I feel good about. So it's kind of all over the shop. I think the big thing for me anyway is consistency, meaning just show up and do it. Even if it's just, a page or 2 that comes out, you just have to show up and do it. and yeah, it can be really frustrating when it's not sort of flowing like you want it to. But
All right.
you know,
what do you do if you get writer's block? If you get it, how do you battle it?
take a really long walk, drink a glass of wine, watch something that I love. Pre-COVID time for me, it was going to see a piece of theater, even a really, really bad piece of theater, would still sort of spurn me on, either out of spite or out of like, oh, well, I'm not going to make that mistake. I'm going to do this or that. Or if I saw something that was so inspiring, it's like, yeah, what is it to stay up another couple of hours and to try to get some pages out, or film. I mean, I have there are some touchstone films for me. This is going to sound crazy. I love Dog Day Afternoon so much, so much. And on days where I'm really blocked, sometimes I will just watch Dog Day Afternoon and get myself going again.
It's a good pick. You can't go wrong.
Man, oh man. But the dialogue is so excellent. The characters are so interesting. I mean, yeah, forget it.
Well, so Gene, how did you pick your director for this? How did John come on board?
That's a great story. I had worked with John on a short film we did a few years before called Bada Bing Bada Boom. And of course, John has extensive experience in television as a director of photography. So I had him come to my apartment because I wanted to ask him if he would be DP on my film, which would have been fantastic. And then he sat there with a smile and he says, I got one better for you. How about I direct this? And I went, whoa. And I sort of had a moment and I went, okay, wait, now think about this. Because, don't be rash. Think about this. And I thought, well, I always have admired his visual sense. He is a person who sees, when his photography that he posts, you can just see the depth. I was a photographer too. And it's like, you see the depth of how he thinks about a scene and how he frames it up. And I said, this could be very interesting. The question became, how do we make it so that his first outing as a film director, he can concentrate on what he knows absolutely best coming into this. And how can we make it so that he doesn't have to be overburdened with the things that he doesn't have as much experience with, such as directing actors? And at that moment, in that 30 seconds, I said, you know what, John, I want to introduce you to somebody. And that was Patrick Lillis. And Patrick Lillis, of course, has so much stage experience, and he is one of the best actors, directors out there. There's a few in the city, obviously, and I said, I'd like you to have lunch. I have an idea that could make this really great. And what suddenly came to mind, I said, boy, if I could pull this off, this would be great. And what it was, and so we had lunch and they both loved each other instantly. It was wonderful. And I said, guys, I want to get the best of both worlds. I can't afford to go out there and get an actor's director who's also a visual director because it's difficult, they're booked, and it's expensive. So what if you guys collaborated on this? And they went all in and they thought it was a great idea. And that's what we had on set, was that John would be rotating cameras and he'd have the whole layout and storyboards and everything, and he'd be concentrating on that. And we didn't have to worry about things because he brought a professional crew with him from regular TV, episodic television, because it was their month off. And so he brought all this crew with him that he knew, and it was just wonderful crew. But at the same time, then when we were on the set, it would be Patrick, while he was busy working on the next shot, they would be talking and always up to par with each other. And Patrick would come wandering out into the set. And of course, the actors knew it's like, here comes a note. But especially in rehearsal, Patrick was there for rehearsal as well. And so it was Patrick who came out and would tweak our performances and offer, in his inimitable way, he'd give us a hint. He would just throw a hint out there. When I was coming home to dinner, he'd say, Gene, why don't you, you probably had a bad day at work. And okay, boom, you're locked, you're changed, you're doing it. And that and so that allowed us to get the best of both worlds for an indie movie.
What title did he end up with in your credits officially? Because I mean, I know that it wasn't a co-director title because John has sole director title.
We did attempt to get him into DGA so that he could be part of the director credit, but understandably they thought that it was too much of a reach. So he is on the top of the scrolling credits, the very top, as creative consultant.
Yeah. And DGA has very defined guidelines for co-directors. I've interviewed some before who are long-term co-directing teams that really had to go through the rigmarole. They actually have a panel that investigates. And somebody a year or two ago told me the story. Those co-directors literally talked about having to go through a DGA panel to prove that they really are co-directors to get the credit.
I was DGA for several years when I was a commercial director. I joined. They got me into DGA like that because of the firm I joined. So it's all about who are you with and what company are you keeping, and
No, actually, you know what? It was the Pet Sematary podcast. That's what it was. It was for the remake of Pet Sematary a few years ago, and they had like some famous directors on the panel that like were really grilling them about how they were breaking up their shots, where they were, how often they were together. So yeah, it's tough. I want to get into the spoilers section, but before I do, you told us your schedule. You said it was 24 days. Is that right?
Yes.
And so what was your budget, if you're able to say?
It was about 1.8.
Okay. And did you get tax credits? Because that's something that's really important. That's great. How
federal and New York City. Of course, New York City, I'm still waiting, but I can understand it. I can understand the issue here, and it's like it's okay. It's all right. I'm not going to go off in a puff of smoke,
Right. But okay. But so you were able to get tax credits.
Yes.
That's great. Yeah, I live in a very small town. It's called Los Angeles, and not a lot of filming happens here. So the opportunities for tax credits are very rare in Los Angeles, California. So it's always interesting with all the runaway production to hear about. And by the way, I'm glad you shot in New York. Just to hear how people get tax credits in other states, because my state can't figure it out. All right, podcast listeners, we are going to go into these spoilers because there's a lot to talk about. So if you have not seen King of Knives, go rent it. Go see it however you can. Press pause right here because we're going to get into the spoilers, and then come back and listen to the rest of the podcast. Right off the bat, Lindsay touched on it earlier, Gene. There's some autobiographical stuff in here for you. And, you playing this possible iteration of yourself brings to light some interesting notions as well. Where do you draw the line as to what was autobiographical and what you needed to fictionalize, and kind of the inspiration for the story, now that we could kind of talk a little more about the dynamics of it?
When I was in my late 30s, I lost my father. He died very suddenly, and he died at 61. So it was way too soon. And it was like, bang, just like that. And that, in addition to at the same time, I was having some frustration with not being able to transition from commercial directing to something that is not by committee, if you know what I mean. Commercial directing is great. And there's a few great, marvelous auteurs. There always are a top 10, but then the rest of us have to work with committee, and it can be tough. So because of that, and I had 2 young children at the time, who are my older children, and a house and a mortgage, and had it been the pandemic back then, I don't think I'd be in that house. I was that overdrawn. Everything was kind of, the stress was building. And the bottom line is I had a midlife crisis. I didn't quite realize it till years later, and looking backwards going, oh, is that what that was? Right. And, you kind of you don't realize it as much when you're going through it. And I swore to myself that someday I would love to, I knew plenty of friends since then that have gone through it. And then, of course, there's this thing called a quarter life crisis, which is quite interesting for millennials, because they're not making
that. That's real. That's a thing.
It is absolutely real. And and it really has to do with, if you take where I was struggling, and I wasn't being satisfied with what I was doing, and how am I going to support my children? In quarter life, millennials are having, frankly, a terrible time of it in terms of having an arc in their careers that is satisfying to them and is giving them, is not just working at Whole Foods.
It makes sense, of course.
It's very tough, and because look, I don't mind sharing. It's like when I joined the ad agency, I didn't have a college degree. I quit college. I was bored. I was bored. So I said, nah, I know what I need to know. I'm tired of school. I want to get to work. Became a recording engineer. Boom. Okay, now this is fun. But the problem is, if that were today, what would I don't think I could get in without having the degree. There's so many jobs I could not start in. And this is part of what the quarter life crisis is. It's like, what am I doing? What am I going to do the rest of my life? Where are the opportunities? And that's something, that's an ongoing discussion, but it became a very real part of this movie. And I could see it in millennials, what was happening to them. And that was something that we wanted to make sure was in the movie. It's part of their getting a screw loose. With Sadie, she went in one direction, right? To control her life. And so she was going to do everything right. And this was the guy for her, damn it. And she was going to get married. And that's how this works. And then you have the younger daughter, like a lot of younger daughters. And she's the rebel. And she's like, F
Katie.
this. Yeah, Caitlin. And it's like, screw this. It's like, you're all a bunch of idiots. It's like, and she doesn't, and like the midlife, like I experienced, I saw her at one point in her life going through that herself, only at a much younger age. And I'm going, whoa. But that's what fed what's going on in the movie, is that everybody is kind of going through their thing at the same time. And it's multi-generational. And that was on purpose to tell this story.
I'm curious at what point introducing you, though, like your grief of because obviously there's a point at which he quits the agency. There's his marriage on the rocks, and I'm curious, were those things that you mapped out that you wanted to get from an early stage, or were those things that came in later?
I guess the best way to express that is being remarried myself. I guess I admit I'm a little sensitive about it. Lindsay knows this about me. It's like, I don't wear it like a badge of honor. When something fails like that, especially when children are involved, I don't have to tell people who go through it. The guilt is unbelievable, if unless you're inhuman, and it sticks with you for the rest of your life. And so, yes, that I knew what that felt like. So I knew authentically what it felt like, and I knew authentically what it was. And so the brilliance in what Lindsay was able to do was to take these stories that I was telling her of what I was actually doing. And the movie doesn't reflect exactly the actions that I did. We pushed Frank a little bit because it's drama and it needs to be film and everything else. But it definitely was rooted in my life experiences that I felt that I saw all my friends, a lot of my friends going through. And I thought, well, somebody's got to talk about this, but we need to make it so that you get a chuckle out of it too, because after all, that's life.
I mean, it's interesting, and Lindsay, feel free to join in here, but for the arc of Frank, I mean, what's going on is, he's kind of going through the movie, giving everyone else advice, right?
Yeah.
And he's walking around himself like a basic train wreck.
Like a total.
Yeah. And you're just kind of waiting for, at what point is either someone going to give him advice, or is the world going to catch up with him? And that might be your introduction of the kind of, metaphysical tarot card reading that he has. And that's how he ends up on that path towards redemption or not redemption. It seems like redemption because everybody's in a pretty happy place at the end. But tell us about that and that arc for that character.
What I love about Frank is that he has zero filter at this particular point in his life. So listening to some of the what's so crazy is he is a mess. He's a complete mess. but he's also sort of dropping these truths on characters that if I heard them, they would give me pause, you know? And I feel like there are multiple characters within the script that their sense of sort of like civility and what I'm supposed to say gets stripped away, and they can just sort of have honest and frank and very difficult conversations, which is something that I am forever obsessed with. You know, I'm always interested in how characters respond to trauma, however far away that trauma is. Because the truth about trauma is that you just have to go through it. Like you can avoid or circumvent or try to, but really at the end of the day, everyone just has to go through it. So what I wanted was a family that was all going through it. And these nuggets from, you know, when Jean and I met of, you know, divorce and loss and the hilarity of trying to get your life back into perspective, and drugs and fun and New York City, you know, it just made for this really lovely cocktail in my head to sort of play with. I mean, I mentioned before that I like to use humor. So many of my pieces revolve around death, because I think that if you're in a place where a character is going through something or trying to, you know, move through trauma, they're liable to say or do anything, and it's socially acceptable, which is just like the best. It's the best.
I mean, he's definitely giving the thorny advice to everyone. And tell us about the tarot cards.
So I started working with the most, my sort of day job. I started working with this really amazing woman named Tristan Roscoe, who is a little witchy. Like she's got a little witchiness to her, and always has a tarot deck with her. And one of the very first nights that we were all out sort of as a crew, as sort of like an office crew, I was really going through it. I was in the middle of just one of the worst years of my life. I had had far too many margaritas, and she busted out this tarot deck. And, you know, I kid you not, I had this moment of like, I don't know how she knows this about me. And I have this obvious, I had this really crazy thing going on in my head. But after she had read my cards, I kind of felt like it was all going to be okay. I just sort of had to move forward. And then, of course, I was like, teach me everything you know. Please teach me about the tarot deck. And really, it's a lovely way to sort of, you know, reflect, meditate, all of that. The cards are lovely. Their meanings are lovely. And it's a hell of a little plot device to move a character forward. So yeah, so that's sort of like, that's where the tarot reading lived. But I also wanted Frank's particular card reader to remind him of someone else. I wanted that scene to feel really intimate and different. And I wanted it to feel like it was a moment for Frank as a character to kind of pivot.
Can I wanted to interject here just for a second, add to that, is that this is another thing where, I don't know, I feel like Lindsay and I have a very interesting, I know how the relationships are supposed to work and all that, but one of the things that helps so much is that, and when I read that script and I see what she's written and the pacing's good, everything's good, and then I get to cast. And one of the beauties of film, especially when it's intimate, like the tarot reading scene is, it's a very intimate thing going on here. You know, Frank is off his gourd on Molly, and and he's literally hallucinating. But who is this person? Wow. And he has the light behind him. See, so that's John with his lighting, and it's like, who is this person with the cards? And casting Justin Sams in that, there was nobody else that came into casting. We did an enormous amount of casting. When he came in, he was the only person who did what Lindsay's intention was that I could take with me and bring into the casting room, which was, it's not about the cards. It's about this poor, pathetic older guy trying to relive the 60s. And he wants to help him. This guy wants to help him. Sebastian wants to help him. And Justin was the one that had so much empathy towards this man. That's what his scene was about, was he wanted to reach out and help him. And throughout the movie, this is a lot like what goes on. There's some very strange characters, but like in terms of, it's like, oh, well, that's not very nice. But basically, one of the things that I was very satisfied with what Lindsay did was, in particular, was allowing the characters to all have a consequence for their actions and some redemption. And because that's kind of how it works, is that you can be bleak for a while and then you find your redemption. And a lot of these characters are having that arc. It may not be complete in their part of the movie, but so the actors had to be cast to be able to rise above the words alone, which give you the raw material, and be able to then feed into the next layer, which they did.
I don't know if I told you this, Gene, but Justin and I had worked together theater-wise before on a few occasions, and he is one of my very favorite actors. I think he makes the most interesting choices, consistently. So when you had told me that he came in to read, I was thrilled because I could easily see him playing Sebastian. And he also has that just sort of it helps that he's just a stunningly beautiful human. So that helps as well. But there's just something about him and his energy that he brings onto film that I was so thrilled that he was involved with it.
Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine. We are publishing a new issue, darn it. Issue 42 is finally going to be going live. By the time you heard this, it might already be live. So please go over to backstory.net. Check it out. You could read us on a desktop or laptop, or of course through our iPad app. If you've never read us before, make sure to test drive us. See what we're all about and read the free issue over at backstory.net. Or of course, you could find it in the iPad app as well. Backstory, that's our iPad app. And look, you could give the gift of Backstory during this holiday season, so please remember that. You could give a gift through our website. That's how you would give a gift to somebody else. And, when you subscribe on our website, it will give you login credentials that you'll still be able to use on your iPad as well, so that works for you. And I'm going to even sweeten the deal. You could use Save 5. That's Save and the number 5 on our website, backstory.net, and that will save you $5 off a subscription. But man, do we have cool stuff in there. I'm going to do a complete podcast telling you what's in it. It's going to be a shorty podcast, but we have exclusive scripts that have never been seen anywhere in the world outside of Hollywood by writers of note, that are unproduced screenplays that are really cool that I can't wait to tell you about. We have interviews with some of the best screenwriters in the world, comic book writers, TV showrunners and writers. We have so much great stuff in there that I really know you're going to dig it. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber to my passion project, Backstory Magazine. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right back into our chat with Lindsay Joy, the screenwriter, and Gene Pope, the actor, producer, and the co-writer of this film. And look, supporting independent cinema is really important as well. So I do hope you go check out King of Knives. And, you could find it on iTunes or Amazon to rent. And if you like it, leave a good review. Let other people know, because that helps the algorithm for rentals as well. And it's always good to support independent filmmakers, especially during these times. So thanks for considering. But now let's jump right back into our chat with Lindsay and Gene. One of the things that the tarot cards unlock as well is, we get teases early on in the movie that his son Daniel, who was gay, he'd lost him. It's not clear how. And then we know his daughter Caitlin is gay, but somehow she infers that, you know, she's surprised that he's accepting of that, because she hides it from him a little with her lover, who she refers to as her best friend or girlfriend. And you know, Frank's okay with it, and she was kind of surprised because, you know, it's alluded to that Frank was not as nice to his son, or certainly as accepting. And we then, you know, in the end, there's a great moment where Frank goes back looking for Sebastian, the card reader, and, you know, he meets this other gal who's there, and she's an aerialist, I believe is the title used, you know, the circus
Correct.
performer who slides down on the silks and stuff. And there's a great shot where she slides down and her feet are by her face, are by Frank's face, and it causes him to break down, because it gives him a flashback to discovering his son, who we now learn has committed suicide, and, you know, the feet hanging in front of his face triggers that. So I'm curious to talk about that, because you know, it's definitely the elephant in the room for the much of the movie. You know, the death of their son has definitely triggered a lot for that family, and has put them through a lot. But there definitely seems like a lingering guilt that Frank is starting to face up to about his lack of acceptance for his son's lifestyle choice. So tell us about writing that and how it played out for you in the film.
So during one of our dinners, Jean had sort of planted the seed of, you know, Frank sort of meeting a younger woman. So we talked about the marriage being on the rocks, and I thought that made that tracked for me, for his character. But I didn't want it to fall into that category, the sort of like older man, younger woman, that's the reason the marriage doesn't work out. It just felt like a trope I didn't want to rehash. And we had already planted seeds for Daniel dying by suicide.
Frank's
so
son.
I just wanted to figure out a way to have that moment of feet in front of his eyes, and for that to be the moment that we see him break, we see all of the hurt, we see all of the guilt, and how vulnerable and raw he really is in this moment. And honestly, that is why she is an aerialist, for that reason alone.
It works. It was a very original way to do it.
That was, I have a few friends that work on silks that do that. So I sort of knew visually that it was possible and that it would look kind of cool. But really, I wanted to sort of flip that scenario of like older man, younger woman, temptation. I just wanted to flip it on its head a little bit. So all of a sudden it becomes his most vulnerable and most raw moment in the movie.
And Frank's view on sexuality, you know, the difference between how he handles it for his son and his daughter.
I actually have a very liberal dad, but when I was growing up, he was in the military. He was Army. And, you could sort of pick up on certain things, especially with his friends. This was actually more like a kernel from one of his friends, where it was like, it's fine if you do that behind closed doors, but not my son. The
concept of don't ask, don't tell, almost.
Yeah. Like, I remember really getting into it with somebody because I had written another play, and it centered around sort of the difficulty of coming out for a character. And this particular director was like, I just don't see the gay thing as being a big deal anymore. And of course, all of my hackles were up because it's like, well, you don't think that because you live in New York City. We live in this, this bubble of, fairly liberal, open-minded thinking. But the rest of the country isn't like that. It's still not like that, not completely. And I thought it would be interesting if this character, Frank, had a little bit of this like old school Italian guy still in him, where it was like, you know, if I don't know about it, it's fine. But if you're going to put it in my face, I don't like it. If you're going to ask me, I don't like it. And I think the reason, or at least if you look in my journals, you're the reason that he's okay with Caitlin and not okay with Danny, is because when Danny took his life, Frank knew that he had to, come correct, that he had to, change the way that he was thinking, or he could lose, to me, the character that he's probably closest to, which is Caitlin. Yeah.
And Gene, tell us about playing that.
Although it doesn't reflect my views, it's something that I've seen in other people. The line that rang the truest for me is when Lindsay, had him say that's like, not my only son. And the fact that what I thought worked so well was that that Frank was, really out of it before he could actually admit to this stuff. It just came spilling out, and he wasn't thinking. That was a trip and a half for me, doing that dance, that party, number one, and then doing the scene with the aerialist. In fact, Lindsay had joined me on set that day for the first time. I hadn't seen her since we started, and I was bawling my eyes out constantly for hours because I couldn't. I had to stay within that horror that I was going through at the moment. And so she came in, and I just came up and hugged her as tight. I said, "I'm so glad you're here." It was one of those. And so for me, it was real. It was real because it was, again, I've lived enough to have been incredibly sorrowful in my life and missing someone, feeling there's a piece missing in my life, stuff like that. And so it really wasn't difficult to do those scenes and to do Frank and also be conflicted, because I remember how my father was, and it's not hard to work off of the memory of how my father was when it came to this kind of a situation, and a lot of his friends at that time. So you draw on that, you draw on what you know.
Okay, I'm going to go on a limb here with this question. I am sure that I'm going to get it wrong, and you guys are going to shoot me down. But it was just something that I was thinking about when I was watching it, because I take notes as I'm watching it and just kind of have my scenes gauged. And the opening of the movie is Frank checking out guys naked in the gym locker room. And Sebastian, the tarot card reader, is at least presented to be gay. It seems like to me, I think is a fair way to say it. And it made me start to wonder if part of Frank's catharsis and crisis is that maybe there was a part of him subverted, that he was not living his truth per se. And I was wondering if it was going to go in that direction. So tell me that I'm wrong and I'm seeing it wrong, or was there ever an iteration where maybe the film went that way, or your ending went that way?
No, this is, if I may, and then Lindsay, by all means, but playing the character, one of the things, and some people disagree with me on this, but for me, it was the decision to play Frank as kind of just going along with what's happening around him, not to have too strong a point of view about his own existence per se, but he's just kind of like taking the ride. And that's part of a midlife crisis, is you're a passenger on the train. And so the best way to describe it is that these things that you're suspecting is great, because whether that was the intent or not, the effect of the combination of what Lindsay wrote in terms of dialogue or no dialogue, just a look, and Frank's not being able to completely read him 100% is what brings that on. And different people have had different interpretations of that very thing. But yes, that's something that I was happy to see when the movie was when we were editing, and we saw that it was coming together. And we said, oh, there's some room for discussion there. Definitely room for discussion. It's like, I'm touching Justin Sam's face, and like I'm thinking, and then and just think of that though. It's like Lindsay's words gave me the chance to play it so that I'm seeing my son as maybe justification, and I'm high on Molly. But the fact of the matter is I'm very attracted to this man. And I'm stroking his face. But we were in this private tent. There's nobody else that can see us. So yeah, it warms my heart to hear that, because definitely that kind of slight ambiguity was intentional. Not everybody likes it, but it's absolutely there. There's a lot of people who have told me, and again, it's a success of the script, that they watch the movie more than once and they pick up stuff the second time they didn't know was there. And that's the layering that you're alluding to. And so it was very intentional.
Lindsay, your answer to that?
Okay, so my real answer is this. Everybody's on the Kinsey scale somewhere.
Sure.
That's how I really think about it. That opening was pretty different. We had a different scene. We had that the plastic surgeon scene that didn't end up coming to fruition. But I think the initial sort of motivation behind that gym scene was really this like compare, contrast. I don't measure up. Sometimes literally I don't measure up like I used to or like I want to.
So the insecurity that plays into it.
Yeah. Just to sort of like cement that he's not really where he wants to be or who he wants to be. However, the scene with the tarot card reader, the scene with Sebastian, I wanted that sort of line to be blurred a little bit. Meaning, I think that he finds this sort of, obviously he's meant to represent his son in some way, but I wanted him to be able to find that love within that scene. And watching it as it sort of played out on film, I was like, oh, it's so interesting that there are all of these like sexual undertones to it. Again, to me, like, the beauty of film are those really lovely intimate moments. So I'm glad that those things sort of came through, but did I intentionally sort of like pepper them in? Not necessarily.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fair enough. During production, sometimes there's times when a rewrite's needed. So was there anything that, while shooting the film needed to be rewritten for any reason?
That ending for sure. The coda. Yeah.
Well, tell us about that. Set it up.
Well,
yeah, you go ahead.
I mean, it came from me first. Is that, do you mind, Lindsay, if I explain what it was to start with? So where it ended, which was a very, I thought it was a very theatrical ending. I don't mean overplayed. I mean, as in, this is a great theater moment. Was that basically, we'd had our final goodbye and kiss, and I have to leave. And the kids would walk into the living room. I wouldn't go out; they'd come in. And I would, and then there was a little bit more dialogue as it was explained to them what's going on.
That you and Kathy are breaking up,
right? And then basically I would just leave the house. Maybe you'd see me walking down the sidewalk. I don't know. But that was the end of the movie. And so the thing that I wanted to do very much was that I liked how dramatic it was. But I wanted what I wanted to bring into the story was the special relationship that Roxy and I had, because it was a tough divorce with her mother. And so we became kind of pals. And that's sort of the root of what Caitlin's character was about, is that a father and a daughter who are like friends as well as, who they are and playing the roles. And so for me, I wanted a moment to say that, okay, instead of it being everything is bleak now, we don't know, that's it. And people who have gone through this are going like, oh God, I don't know if I wanted to live through that again. You know what I'm saying? That's the kind of thought that was going through my mind. And so what I did was I thought of, we need something where if I'm out there and then Caitlin comes out. Why? Because all through the movie, she's, it's been set up that we're like buddies, we can throw F-bombs at each other. It doesn't matter. We understand each other. We probably understand each other more than anybody else. And so I decided, wouldn't it be interesting if she came out, offered me a cigarette, and basically we just had a very few words to say. And then, it's the ride in the car. It was all about the car. So we only I ruined the good car. And so she offers me her car. And that whole ending, at that point, the script ended. And then when Roxy and I walking off the patio and into the car and driving off, that was all improv with Roxy and I. But as an example, but having that ending, that's how the ending changed. And I think that I'm very pleased that we were able to show a little bit of light in the darkness, personally. And I think people like the ending. And so, but that's how we got to it. And that was done near the end of shooting, where we decided, you know what? and Lindsay literally popped that out one weekend. It was like, bang. It was like, and it was awesome. And I went, this is absolutely phenomenal,
Editing is the last stage of storytelling. What did you learn about your film in the editing process? What were some of the things that you had to cut, and some of the things that maybe surprised you of like, God, why did we waste time shooting this? We didn't even need it.
Well, there was a scene where that actually showed Caitlin and Darla breaking up, sitting on a stoop in Brooklyn, breaking up. That was written in there, and we shot it. And the problem was that it interrupted the momentum of the film, because everybody was kind of like watching the film intensely. Now, what's next? What's next? What's next? There's the accident. There's this. There's all these things happening, and so it was better to go directly to the hospital than to break up between the crash and the hospital. What was, it was a better dramatic leap for a film than, because there wasn't anything that had to be added. The fact, what convinced me too in the edit room was that when we saw what happened when you took that scene out, is that it was like, okay, you took out the spelling it out, but you didn't have to spell it out. It ended up being very powerful that while Caitlin and I are sitting in the car after I've had a car accident outside the emergency room, and I've got pain pills, and she's, and we're talking about life suddenly in the middle of this craziness that I just went through. And it turns out, then it's revealed that while I was going through my disaster, she was going through her disaster. And that was the perfect moment to reveal it.
It's also a point of view change, and that doesn't happen as often in the movie. Whereas, Frank is in most of the scenes, not all, but most of them, because obviously you get stuff with Kathy and her daughters as well. Was there anything that surprised you, Lindsay, in the editing process?
I sort of knew when things were shuffling around a bit, and as long as I could still make logical sense of it, or as long as I knew there were kind of other lines where, people could still follow along. I felt fine. I felt absolutely fine with it. And to me, an editor's work is like so unsung in terms of like what they really can do to the mood and feel and pacing of a movie. So I felt really thankful that it was with such a loving hand. You could sort of feel that they cared about the story just as much as we all did. Yeah.
What was your toughest scene? What was the scene for you guys that you kept coming back to again and again? So Lindsay, you on the page, Gene, obviously your character, and how did you creatively rise to the challenge?
It was because of we reinforced each other. We really did. It was like, seeing something fresh through, I guess, if I want to call myself a bit of a filmmaker, that's what I am. looking at a script fresh with the filmmaker's eyes and seeing, okay, so how do I see this happening here visually? How is this actually playing out in my mind? And we would catch moments where it's like, you know what? I'm getting bored. It's not happening. It's too much. We need to somehow get from D to E quicker, because I don't think the audience is going to handle this. The last thing I want to do is make, Lindsay, this is not talking about you, but like, an art film. Okay, I tried that once, where it's like, oh, we can do whatever we want. Everybody can be dressed in this and that, and then there's moments where nobody's moving, and it's like, no, forget that. This has got to tell the story, and it's got to tell it filmically. And so there were times when we had to go back because I just couldn't connect it in my head. I couldn't see it, and that's what did it. And also at the same time, I also learned so much, because everything, it's all learning experience. Working with Lindsay has taught me a lot about solutions to problems in a film, because when presented with the problem, she would come up with a solution. I go, yes, of course, it's perfect. It's perfect. Your turn.
Lindsay, your toughest scene, the scene you kept coming back to and writing over and over.
The scene I kept writing over and over. There's a scene in the movie where Kathy and Frank, it's towards the end, and she has torn up a bunch of their pictures, memories together, and they're sort of scattered all over the floor. And there's this really sweet moment where they start to dance together. And what becomes clear over the course of the scene is that Kathy's going to leave him. But I wanted the tone of it not to be this sort of confrontational, argumentative, ugly thing. I wanted her to say all of the things that you can't take back. I wanted her to say all of those things. But what I found challenging was, can I find a way for her to be just as heartbroken knowing the truth of it? I am a writer that believes that writing should cost you something. Not every writer believes that, but I do. If I'm writing something and there's not one scene that I'm crying as I write it, or I'm getting choked up as I write it, if I'm not affected, then it's probably not a very good script. And that was the scene for me. And it took a few go-throughs, because it was a tough one to write. That moment where you realize that a marriage isn't working out, especially one like with Kathy and Frank, it's so many years. It's decades that they've been together, and a whole life that they've built. They've grown up together. It's weighted. It's heavy. But knowing that like the actual right thing to do, it means no one gets what they want. That was the other thing about the sort of going through trauma and the family together. Nobody gets what they want sort of at the beginning versus the end. And yeah, so that's the scene. That was
one. I wanted to add one of the solutions we found for that, as a matter of fact, when we talked, this was during the shoot, is, as I said, is there a way we could take this scene and you've got the girls outside and you got us inside? And I said, why don't we try interleaving these scenes?
Yeah.
And that's when that scene, I was very afraid that the scene was going to be, it was all too much at once. And then you have to start again with the other pair, and it would be too much. And that's, I remember us discussing that. And
having me break that up, and then having the argument outside feed what was going on inside, even
contrast.
Even though they felt different, actually opened it up for me, meaning those two scenes existed separately. And it was when we brought them together and sort of script wise kind of interwove them, that it clicked, that it actually clicked.
How many cameras did you guys have when you were shooting?
2, except for the when the car crashes, which is your typical, GoPro. Excuse me, GoPros all over the car, at the sides, the top, the inside. There was multiple cameras when that was being shot. Yeah,
that makes sense. Well, so what's next for you guys? What are you working on next, or what's kind of juggling around?
Well, think about this. Now that the family's basically, they've had their little going off in different directions. Imagine what could happen next, and we're working on a part 2.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes.
Wow. That's is the POV going to stay the same? Is it still going to focus on Frank, or is it going to shift?
We're at the initial stages of the script. We've got 60 pages done, whatever. But at this point, it's kind of like, again, for me, I'm staying open to it. I want to see what comes out from our discussion. And yes, I have my journal too. It's mostly on my phone in the middle of the night, because that's when the best shit comes up. And so then we coordinate and share, and it affects what she's writing. But yeah, it's a good question whether the focus is on Frank. I don't think it has to be on Frank. I think that we've introduced all the characters now. And I think that now that we have these characters, they're full lead-on characters in their own right. And I think at this point, everybody wants to see what happens to all 4 of them. Yeah. And I think that will allow us the liberty of jumping between them as we see the things. And of course, they're going to come together again. And Lindsay has already written an hysterical, made me fall down laughing scene of them getting together, which we won't give anything away about that. But it is hysterical given what has happened.
So is your plan to have something to shoot like that, like the sequel after the pandemic, or when enough people get their vaccinations that production could resume safely?
I think it would be a wonderful idea to try and shoot for that, because I think we're still a ways off. And but I'm all down for it, because I think we're getting a good reception, and I think we can get the funding we need. All the important stuff.
Well, so here's the magic question. Having gone through the pandemic as the world is, when you do a sequel to a pre-pandemic movie, are you planning to address the pandemic in it? Because that's what so many writers are kind of grappling with right now.
We had an interesting conversation, Lindsay and I, where she wrote me an ending scene, an idea for an ending scene. And I wrote back a little appendix to that. And I don't want to reveal what it is, but let's just say that it makes it clear that what happens in this family is happening before the pandemic.
Although I will say this, if we start to workshop it and it becomes clear story-wise that setting it current post-pandemic adds to the story without it being a gimmick or sort of a kind of a cheap way in, if we can, if it serves what we're actually trying to say about this family, I'm all for it. It's been such a crazy, to say it's been a crazy year is such an understatement, but I feel like when I'm checking in with the people that I love, what's so very clear is that priorities have shifted and come into sharp focus, that what you want and what you need and sort of all of the things that I think on the day-to-day when we get sort of caught up in things feel selfish. We have the chance right now to sort of reflect and think about it. It's the silver lining of all of this, batshit crazy stuff that we're going through.
The one thing I would add to that also is simply this, and that is that I also am thinking ahead and saying there's going to be a rash of COVID movies. And so I don't want to be, the way things time out, you never know. It takes a year or more to get the thing done. You don't know what's going to go there and take all your best ideas away for that. And so for me, in a similar vein that this movie is kind of brings you like a good distraction to this. And I also feel that it's a little bit like 9/11, where You know, the image of the towers is so iconic, and it's like it's a trigger. The image of people in masks, I feel, is equal to that, and that therefore we have to be very careful that doesn't be that, you know, you're not seeing half my face anymore. How long can that last?
I think we're gonna be stuck with it for a while, though. From even some of the stuff I've been reading about the vaccines, that just going in public, like the idea of going to a movie or you know, a ball game, a sporting event, a concert, that even if you've been vaccinated, the one question mark that seems to be there right now for the vaccine is, could you still be a carrier and thereby transmit to someone else, even if it doesn't affect you? And for that reason, it seems like we might be having mask protocols for a while, in such that I think there's going to be a challenge for filmmakers to turn it into something positive rather than the negative, as you said, traumatizing image that some people interpret it as now, in which it's just for a period, a way of life, you know, to protect your neighbor. Like, so that is a challenge. And you've seen TV shows, like, I think even like the show This Is Us, which goes back and forth in time a lot, has already addressed it on their show. Because you know, they have been managing to film properly here in Los Angeles and continue to film. So it's just interesting to see how it's going to shake out. I know people are going to lean into period pieces as well, because they don't even have to bother addressing it. So there's going to be so many different ways. But the only thing that I would add, honestly, Gene, because it was interesting that you said, you know, 9/11, like certain images, but you know, 9/11 affected us all as a nation for sure, but it's sincerely affected New Yorkers specifically, you know, and obviously DC and Pennsylvania as well. But for the pandemic, it really is a worldwide event where I think that there's so many different variants of experience through it that I think you're going to see it longer than some people might think you're going to. You know, like I think it's something that we're going to have as a certainly a time marker for sure for a while, but I think you're going to see traces of it in other films for, I don't know, at least the coming year or two, without a doubt.
I'm not averse to listen. The whole idea here is that the best material, especially in writing, comes from keeping an open mind and seeing where it leads you. And so we'll see where it leads us, you know?
Absolutely. Well, look, go on, Lindsay.
I was just going to say, I agree. Like, I feel like for a very long time, whenever there has to be a marker in a script of like, okay, it's now or it's then or before or whatever, it's going to end up being super, super clear. And I think what will be really interesting is like, you know, our handshake's going to go away. Is that going to be sort of like, you know, a before times thing, or, you know, hugs, greeting somebody, you know, even watching things now, whatever it is, something will happen. I'll look to my husband and I'm like, oh, the before times when I could just embrace a human.
Like any movie where somebody reaches over and they start eating off of somebody else's plate at a friendly dinner. I'm like, what? And then like every single crowded elevator scene ever. I'm just like, oh my God, like the tension, you don't even know what it is there.
I know that we'll see that as a trope for a very long time. Again, I think we're going to see it used in brilliant ways, and we're going to see it used in such hacky ways. It's just one of those things.
Yeah, totally. Well, look, you guys have been very generous with your time. I know we went over a little, and I'm glad that you're working on a sequel and you have something else percolating. So hopefully when everybody could get back to production safely, you could go out and make the damn thing. So Gene, Lindsay, thanks for your time.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Such a pleasure. Yeah.
It was fun chatting again. And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to screenwriter Lindsay Joy and co-writer Gene Pope, who's also the actor and the producer of this fine film, King of Knives. And you know, you could rent King of Knives in iTunes or Amazon or any of the usual places you go to rent a movie. And I hope you do that to support independent cinema. And I hope you also leave a review over there if you liked what you saw, because that'll help the film in the algorithm of all these interesting places that we could see movies. But we got to stick together. We got to support independent cinema in these times. So I thank you for considering that. And thank again, Lindsay and Gene, for coming down to chat with us. And of course, while you're surfing around online, don't forget to check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. By the time you're hearing this, issue 42 will finally probably be live, or it might be within a day of being live because it is coming out this week. And man, there are so many things that I'm so proud of in this issue. There are so many deep reads. There's screenplays you could only read in Backstory Magazine, nowhere else in the world, like unproduced screenplays by writers of note. We have great interviews with screenwriters, directors, showrunners, comic book writers. There's so much to explore, and I know you're going to dig issue 42. If you've never read us before, you could test drive us at backstory.net on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. You could read the free issue right in there. And of course, if you want to become a subscriber and support us, which is very important during these strange times, it would be greatly appreciated. You could use code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5 over at backstory.net. And if you subscribe there and you have an iPad, you could still use your login credentials to log into an iPad, but that code only works at backstory.net. That'll save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. You could even give us as a gift, any time of year, not just the holidays, and you could send a gift subscription to a friend. So look, it means a lot to me to have my podcast listeners support my passion project. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber to Backstory Magazine. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2020. All rights reserved. And if you want to find me online, you can find me as Yo Goldsmith on Twitter or Backstory_mag on Twitter. I also use those same handles on Instagram, actually. You could find me as Yo Goldsmith on Instagram and Backstory Mag on Instagram. And I promise to be using Instagram a little more this year. I'm usually on Twitter. I have a Facebook fan page. I can't admit that I check it too often. You could always email anytime, yogoldsmith@gmail.com. I'm around. I'll get back to you. It's always great to hear from you. What podcasts you like, what magazine articles you like. So I'm happy to respond to your most reasonable inquiries. Don't ask unreasonable stuff because I probably won't be able to respond to that. But look, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.